Thank you, John. You can dismiss his Cub sweatshirt, though, if you want to. Yep. If you're a Nationals fan. Next speaker is Carla Murphy. Carla is a writer, editor at Echoing Ida, which is a Forward Together initiative to amplify the voices of black women and non-binary writers of color. She's been a reporter for various outlets, investigative fund at the Nation Institute, staff reporter for colorlines.com. She's written about criminal justice, labor, other matters affecting urban communities of color. And right now she's senior editor for Chemetrica, which is a research firm that supports humanitarian and development efforts in East Africa.
Can you hear me? Okay. Morning. Closer? How's that? Good? More? Okay. Thank you for having me here. I consider it a great privilege. Thank you, Leo, for having me. Before I start, the kind of circles I run in, they would actually call this a manel because I'm the only woman up here. But that is not for Leo not trying, because Sarah Leonard was supposed to join me, but she had an emergency. So, okay. I prepared not really a lot, to be honest. I'm more comfortable just talking, and you just tell me when to shut up, okay? And I felt the need starting out to kind of set the mood, or maybe my mood, and that mood would be rage or anger, pretty much all the time. And I wanted to lead with that because it defines so much of my being, and it has defined so much of my being my entire life, because I've lived my entire life directly on the color and the class line. So I'm a scholar, just to make it really short, I'm a scholarship kid, like a heavy scholarship kid, who went to prep schools most of my life. So that put me in a very particular environment, but my family is very working class. So I'm in these different worlds all the time. And I mentioned anger because Leo, one of the directives he gave us was, pretend that you're, having a running political conversation with a friend or whatever. And it just so happens that I do have one. With a friend of mine, a white woman from the West Coast. She comes from a very different family from me, but we were both criminal justice reporters, and we were asking kind of similar questions about the impact of mass incarceration on particularly women and families and communities, because that's when you see the horrible effect of mass incarceration, right? Anyway, we have this long-running conversation, and the most recent one that came up was anger. And I thought of this in relation to populism, because when I think of populism, which I think is kind of a very undefined term that can be used by a lot of different people, I think of anger. And my friend was pointing out my rage that I spend most of my life controlling because of the spaces in which I operate. And particularly when Trump was elected, I kind of was like, fuck it. I'm not really trying to be diplomatic. I'm not really trying to be a bridge builder anymore. I'm really not trying to translate for no more white people. And forgive me for speaking in generalizations. So my friend and I have been having this running back and forth about anger and how you show it and how much control you exercise as a black professional woman. And then on this, I'm just going to say one last thing, and then I'll move on to my more substantive point, which is about media. I have another friend who is also a black professional woman. She is an immigrant just like me. And this year, she has a very tough job. She makes about high six figures. And she was having a hard time, and we were in a hotel room together, and she was very tired and exhausted, and I was just being there, being a friend. What people don't know about her, they can see the Prada and they can see all of that. What they don't know is that she started out as a domestic worker 20 years ago when we first met, and she was illegal. And she was laying down, and I'm sitting there with her, because these jobs, you make it, and then they still exact their pound of flesh. And I spend a lot of time writing now. I write a lot of essays, and I write about the cost of upward mobility. And She said to me, you know, one of my first jobs, my jaw is setting, and this is part of the anger, as a poor woman of color. She was called out to a house in Staten Island. I'm from New York. And the mother in the house was on her second kid and had a very difficult first pregnancy, so she was bedridden for the second one. So she was called in to help in the household. Anyway, one night, so she had a room in the household. One night, the husband of the household came into her room stark naked. Now, I've known this person for 20 years, and we've talked about a lot of things, and she had never shared this with me. She's shared the student loans, which we both have. She shared what it is to be illegal, the kind of jobs you have to take. Healthcare, both of us have shared that, how difficult it's been. But she had never shared this. And you know, my jaw is setting as I say this because it makes me angry. This is part of the rage I carry. So then when I wake up on, like, what is it, Saturday, and I hear Donald Trump say something like, they all, what is it? They want everything done for them. So these microaggressions, I think, is, you know, I wanted to set that mood as what it is to be a woman of color, to be a low-income woman of color, and then to be a woman of color who's actually gotten out of that and what it takes to get out of that. I spent a lot of time writing about this, about the cost. A lot of us don't like to talk about the cost and why it's cost my generation so much to move up. And then the more substantive thing I wanted to talk about today was that I really enjoyed the first panel hearing from the two ladies. I really wanted to talk about media and the role of media and whether, I guess my question is, what is the relationship between the union sector and news media and whether you support it? It doesn't matter what your messages are if there's no outlet or very few outlets where there's a working class frame, right? So what are the terms of engagement? And I wanted to just read a few. This is the only thing that I really prepared for this, a few statistics that I hope you consider going forward, because the thing that I look for as a reporter, that I have always looked for, and I think because of my background, is I always looked for outlets or platforms that had at least a working class frame. And by that I mean, frame just means you ask particular questions. So for example, instead of, I wouldn't cover poverty, for example, I would cover inequality. These are very different questions. One sets up very different questions from the other. And I want you to pay attention to, you know, if there is a crisis in democracy, that means that there had to have been a crisis in media before it that precipitated it, right? And this is very important. So just a few statistics of the state of our media. Newsroom employment was 56,900 in 1990. It's about 33,000 today. The number of black journalists working at U.S. daily newspapers has dropped 40% since 1997. For white journalists, that's a 34% drop. For Hispanic and Asians, it's 13% and 2%, but let's consider that altogether people of color make up about 13% of the U.S. news media, 13%, okay? For investigative journalism, Barbara Ehrenreich has a great piece in The Guardian a couple of years back where it says, in America, only the rich can afford to write about poverty. In 2015, it's true. It's part of the reason why I'm no longer an investigative journalist. I can't afford health care. I can't afford to write about the stories I want to write about. And that's not just me, that's all of us. And this has bearing on the issues that you guys are all involved in, right? There was a study that came out in 2015 that showed for independent investigative journalists, so freelancers, that on average, we kicked out about $5,000 of our own money or more to cover the stories we were assigned to cover. I mean, really consider that. So then think about, well, who would be the reporters who can afford to do that? You obviously have to be middle class or upper middle class and up. You can't come from my class, the lower class. I don't care about terms, it is, we were poor. and write about people like you. Last but not least, state houses. Who's covering the state houses, right? I'm sure you guys do a lot of work in the state houses, right? July 2014, according to the Pew Research Center, newspaper reporters covering state capitals declined by 35% between 2003 and 2014. Less than a third of newspapers today assign even one reporter to the State House. Local TV news stations is just 14%, okay? Of the about 1,500 State House reporters out there across the country, fewer than half are employed full-time. This is the state of our media, and it has been for a while. So it's no surprise to me that our democracy is in crisis. And moving forward, as you guys try to figure out how to move forward, you have to pay attention to media. You have to pay attention to whether you're financially supporting media. Foundations have been moving to support media because they recognize the vacuum. So my question is, what are unions doing? That was my... That's it.